welcome to The Sports Show. Good morning and welcome to The Sports Show here on Lake Effect Radio and also streaming live on lakeeffectradio.org/studio. I'm your host, Ryan Kirby. We have a great show for you guys this morning as we will be recapping the Indians game and so much more. So first, let's talk about those Indians as they won 5-3 over the Chicago White Sox. Indians ace Corey Kluber pitched 8 innings and gave up 3 earned runs and struck out 11 and had 2 walks. Jason Kipnis had a home run in this game, and Andrew Miller got the save with three Ks. So looking at the Indians, they're looking at a possible matchup either with the Astros or the Red Sox. Now you look at the Red Sox. They've got those wins. But in my opinion, once the postseason starts, it's a clean slate, meaning they've got no wins and no losses, basically. Because you've got to get back to... you got to get in that mode. So for the Indians, if they can have that good pitching rotation with Trevor Bauer, Corey Kluber, Carlos Carrasco, they can make a deep run in the playoffs. But if something slips up, they still have to have the batting, the hitters to produce runs and to get wins. But it all comes back to pitching because they have to get to the point that most pitchers like Corey Kluber are pitching 7 or 8 innings and either giving up a run or 2, but the strikeouts have to be up, near 11 or above. So this has to be sort of the norm for the Indians, but in the end, as long as they can get wins, the hits and everything else will come. And for them to beat the White Sox 5-3, that score doesn't really... The White Sox aren't all that great of a ball club because they're not up there with the Indians. But when you look at how the Indians are, having Josh Donaldson, having Edwin Encarnacion, they need to have more runs scored than just 5, in my opinion. I mean, yeah, they won, but they should be scoring at least 10 runs against a team like the White Sox because the pitching for the White Sox wasn't that great. And to only score 5 runs on them doesn't really make sense because we have the hitters that can hit a home run or 2 per game. But then you also look at the guys like Rajai Davis who can steal bases and who are fast, but in the end it all just seems like they're getting to that point that okay, we're almost in postseason form. But after this game, they should be playing to the point that they are, not giving up or giving up maybe a run or 2. But that's about it because when you look at that, it also makes sense that Kluber's pitching 8 innings and has 11 Ks. I mean, for him, that's like the standard. But for other guys, it should be like a complete game. Like for Carrasco, he should be pitching well into the 8th inning. But in his last start, he only pitched 6 or 7 strong innings. So in my opinion, Kluber's like that norm that, okay, you have to play well all throughout the game. You can't just have one good strong inning. You have to have a couple strong innings to give the Indians a chance to win the game. Because if the pitching is there, the hits and the motivation to get hits will come. and they will produce. I mean, you saw with Jason Kipnis, he had a home run in the game. There were base hits. But also the lineup change is going to be a huge thing come postseason time, because they're going to have Jason Kipnis possibly in center field. They're going to possibly have Jose Ramirez over at second base. They may have Rajai Davis in center field. They may have Greg Allen in center field. But no matter the lineup, they should always have that motivation to produce runs, even if the lineup's different. Because if you put Ramirez at second and Donaldson at third, you still have a great infield. But the outfield is going to be a little bit different because Kipnis hasn't played center field in a long time. So if you put Greg Allen in the mix there, the wins will come, and the earned runs will slowly but surely decrease to maybe 1 or 2 a game. Because even though it's a 5-game series to start out the playoffs, you got to win 3 out of 5. It's not. I mean, every game is. You got to have that mentality of it's one game. It's basically like a game 7, so to speak. Because if you're down in the series 2-0, heading back to the other team's ballpark, you have to win 3 straight in order to win the series. But let's say if you're down 2-0 heading back, the odds of you winning 3 straight are slim to none, because odds are the now home team has a better record at home. But there's also that chance. I mean, look at I'm going to change sports here, but look at the Cavs in 2016. They were down 3-1 to a 73-win team and came back and won 3 straight. I mean, that no one ever thought that would happen. But there's that motivation of you're basically playing a game 7 from then on, basically. That's the mindset heading into game 3. But you have to look at how, if the pitching is there, like if Trevor Bauer stays healthy and Andrew Miller stays healthy, the pitching staff for the Indians is lethal throughout. I mean, in my opinion, they have the best pitching staff in baseball, because you have an ace like Corey Kluber, who has won a Cy Young Award, who should win this year. But then you have these other teams that are creeping up on the Indians, like the Astros or the Red Sox. But that really the pitching rotation for the Indians is lethal when you have Corey Kluber in there. When you have a guy like Dan Otero pitching, you have to work around him. Like, okay, you may have to take a time to say, hey, you're gonna have to slow it down, like, because he rushes pitches. Like, you can tell when he looks in, he looks at that sign and he immediately says yes. Kluber, he wants different pitches. He doesn't want to throw the same first pitch to every batter. So that's the one thing that's been a huge boost to Kluber, is that he doesn't always throw the same first pitch to every batter. Because if he were to do that, every batter would know, okay, let's say he throws a first pitch slider. Every batter knows, okay, that first pitch is going to be a slider. But for him to change it up really makes it difficult for the offensive team to, get hits, because they don't know what pitch is coming. It could very easily be his fastball or his curveball. But also when you factor in guys like Josh Donaldson, who can produce hits and who can get wins, or who can get hits and get hits in a big way, and then you add in a guy like Francisco Lindor, who has been here and who has come up clutch a few times this year, it shows that the Indians are a complete team. But once they get their first win in the postseason, in my opinion, they can win a World Series. But if you drop like they did last year, I mean, yeah, they played a great team in the Yankees, but you look at how good the Yankees are. I mean, they've got Giancarlo Stanton, Aaron Judge, you look at those guys, the Indians just had not seen a team like that in a while. I mean, in 2016, they blew through the American League. But once they got, like last year, once they got to that first series against the Yankees, they hadn't seen a team like that. They haven't seen a team like New York, where they have these young guys who can just hit the ball, crazy far, like Giancarlo Stanton, like Aaron Judge. And then when the Yankees added Aroldis Chapman that year, their pitching staff was lethal against the Indians. But the Indians were able to get a few wins in that series, but they weren't able to win the series overall because they just couldn't produce enough runs to win those games. But it all comes down to, can the Indians have a good pitching staff, and then can they stay healthy throughout? Because if there are those times where you have to pitch Kluber not 2 games in a row, but 1 game, and then maybe 2 days later pitch him again. And in my opinion, that would hurt him because he only gets about, 3 days rest? That's not enough rest for a guy who's possibly pitching a complete game, 1 or 2 games at a time. So when we come back, we will be talking about all things Cleveland Browns and a little fantasy football. This is the Sports Radio Show here on Lake Effect Radio.
You're listening to Lakeland's Lake Effect Radio, the official home of Lakeland Sports. If you want to watch or listen, you can tune to lakeeffectradio.org/sports.
Welcome back to the Sports Radio Show here on Lake Effect Radio. Now let's talk a little Cleveland Browns because they just added kicker Greg Joseph yesterday, and they just traded Josh Gordon on Monday, excuse me. So when you look at now, the Browns have a game this Thursday night against the Jets at home. It is definitely a winnable game because New York has a rookie quarterback in Sam Darnold. Now, that's the guy the Browns could have gotten in the draft, but instead they went with, everybody knows, Baker Mayfield. But if the Browns, they have a good offense. They do. They've got Antonio Callaway, Jarvis Landry, and they have Tyrod Taylor. But when you look at the defense, they've got some good defensive guys. Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward. But for the Browns to actually get a win, they have to play all 4 quarters. Because if you saw in their last game against the Saints, they didn't play. It didn't seem like they played all 4 quarters. They played 3 quarters and then just completely, dropped in the 4th quarter when you look at that, they have to. As I said before, they have to play all 4 quarters, but they only played 3 quarters of the game. But when you look at a team like the Jets, they will play all 4 quarters. They play to win. They don't, choke in the 4th quarter. They will play the whole game. The Browns, in my opinion, most of their games, they play 3 quarters and then they just choke during the 4th quarter. So if Tyrod Taylor and those guys can produce, and the defense was big against New Orleans, but the offense didn't come through until, 2 minutes to go in the 4th quarter. They had a few good, plays. The running game was there, but they have to throw the ball a little bit more because, in my opinion, football the running game is very key. Don't get me wrong, but the passing game, Tyrod Taylor hasn't thrown the ball all that much. His second passing touchdown of this season was to Antonio Callaway on that 4th and 3. So for him to only have 2 passing touchdowns this year, it really shows that he needs to produce more. He needs to show that he has a good arm, because if he's not going to throw the ball often, the Browns might as well just bring in Baker Mayfield and see what he can do, and see if he can throw the deep ball, and show that he has a good arm, that he can also run the ball. Because with Tyrod Taylor, he's also a runner as well, but that's basically what he does most of the time. He hasn't thrown the ball that much. And for him, and he didn't have that many turnovers when he was with Buffalo. He only has had 2 turnovers, excuse me, when he's with the Browns. So when you look at the offense and defense, the Browns are doing well. Don't get me wrong; they are hanging games. But for them, I think the biggest thing was to release Zane Gonzalez, because he lost the game for us. He did. And when you look at, they have a guy like Brendan Colquitt, the punter, who's a punter, but he also was a field goal kicker in Baltimore. You could have very easily brought him in and said, hey, go kick a field goal for us. Because if you have a guy who's 0 for 2 on extra points and 2 of 4 on field goals, in my opinion, you take him out and you either go for it on 4th down, or you go for a 2-point conversion. Because you don't want to bring a guy in who's not doing well and ask him to, in a game with the game on the line, or possibly tying the game to go to overtime on the line, you don't want to bring a guy in who's been struggling, because that just shows that, okay, yeah, you'll take risks, but you also think about that the offense was working. I mean, that long pass that Tyrod Taylor had to Antonio Callaway, that worked. Now, I mean, maybe it was just luck, but it worked. And if they were to go for 2 in that situation instead of kicking that field goal, it could have very easily been a completely different game, because Carlos Hyde was running the ball very, very, very well. He's surprised everybody. Nick Chubb, the rookie, he's been running the ball very well, but he hasn't shown that he's a top-tier running back in the NFL. Because you look at him when he was in college at Georgia, he could have very easily won the Heisman Trophy a few of his years at Georgia. But he was a great running back. I mean, he was up there for probably the best running back in college football. But when you get to the NFL, he hasn't shown those kinds of skills. I mean, you look at rookie Saquon Barkley with the Giants. He's the same guy. I mean, you watch tape of him with Penn State, and then you look at tape when he's with the Giants. It's like the same exact guy. I mean, he's busting up the hole and going. With Chubb, he's stopping and then trying to reverse the ball. He's not looking for another hole. He does look for holes, but he doesn't. He looks at the wrong time. Like, he'll look very late into the play. But then when you look at Carlos Hyde, when he sees a hole, he goes. No matter if there's no hole there, he doesn't go to the opposite side of the field. He looks for, on that side of the field, another opening. So I think that's one of the things that Chubb needs to work on, is that if there's not a hole where you're going, stay on that side of the field and find a hole. Now, if there's no hole on that side of the field, after you look twice, fine, you can go to the other side. But if we keep doing that, where he is trying to reverse the ball and do these like special plays, we're not going to win games, because our running game will be up there. But if you put Chubb in, our running game is basically nothing. So one thing would be is that with Tyrod Taylor, he has to throw the ball a heck of a lot more than he has been, because I think he's worried about that turnover, having turnovers, in his stats. Because with Buffalo, he had no turnovers, no passing turnover, no interceptions thrown when he was with Buffalo. So he has to be a little bit more risky when he's with the Browns, because he has to throw the ball. The Browns can't just be that running team, because there's not very often is a football team just lucky with the running game. There's teams that are lucky with the running game, don't get me wrong, but when you don't have a good offensive line, you have to throw the ball a lot more because there's guys that are open. I mean, Jarvis Landry was open a few times in that game where there were openings. I mean, Tyrod Taylor saw that. He just didn't throw it. He would either throw it out of bounds or he would take a sack, which in my opinion was the worst thing you could do, because you run that risk of getting hurt or possibly even fumbling the ball. So I think that the playmaking for Tyrod Taylor really needs to improve, but also the wide receivers need to get more involved. And also they need to run more I'd call them trick plays, like a wildcat formation with Jabril Peppers, because teams in the NFL are used to seeing the Browns as just that team that can run the ball and throw the ball. They haven't seen the team that can, run a wildcat formation with Jabril Peppers, or, a fake field goal, or a fake punt. Any of those plays the Browns haven't done yet. So in my opinion, the reason they're losing games is because teams are so used to the Browns playbook as, okay, running the ball a few times, throwing the ball a few times. There aren't those trick plays in there that will, shake a team up, like they'll be confused about it, because we haven't put it out there yet. I mean, yeah, we've probably they've probably ran it in practice, but when you look at their playmaking, most of the game was the running game against the Saints. There was maybe one or two passing plays, maybe more, but they need to have that passing game, used a heck of a lot more than just 3 or 4 times in a game, because if they just rely on the running game, they're not going to win football games with just a running game and maybe 3 or 4 passing plays, because teams are going to be used to, coming out after halftime like, okay, the team's going to run maybe a passing play, 2 passing plays in a row, and then a running play. So the teams are going to get into that routine of what the Browns are going to be doing every single play, so there won't be that shot of possibly getting a win. So in my opinion, Hugh Jackson needs to be more of that risky guy that, okay, let's run a trick play, let's run a wildcat formation with Jabril Peppers, because you haven't seen him. I mean, you haven't seen him on the offensive side of the ball, because Hugh Jackson doesn't want to throw those out there because he's too worried about, something not going right. But you have to have that risk of, let's see how it works, because if you never run it, you will never know how good it could be, because you never know. He could throw one of those plays with the Jets. He could possibly run a wildcat with Peppers against the Jets, and it could very easily work. But then on the opposite side, it could be not working for them. It could very easily result in a fumble or a pick six. So when you look at that overall, the Browns need to be a better football team at all facets. So now let's talk a little fantasy football, because I know all you guys are playing fantasy football, because that's one of the things these days. So when you're looking at fantasy football, your lineups, I mean, drafting a kicker in the 7th round isn't all that great. But like I've got Aaron Rodgers on my fantasy team. He's been playing so well that actually Sunday, right before the Browns game, I had actually put Tyrod Taylor in, because he had that knee injury, so I was worried that, okay, he may be out. So I put Tyrod Taylor in. Well, last minute, I hear, okay, Rodgers is playing, so I played him, and he racked up a ton of points for me. But also, if you look at some of these teams with these wide receivers, guys don't have, like, I have Julio Jones and T.Y. Hilton are my receivers. If you have guys like that on your team, you could basically be like me. I'm 2-0. But other teams you could very easily go out and get, like I drafted Baker Mayfield, with the 10th pick of the 1st round, and I haven't played him yet. But there's going to be that time that you could very easily bring Baker Mayfield in and see what he can do, or bring in your backup quarterback and see what he can. If he does play, who knows? He could get you at least 10 points. So now back to the Browns, or back to the Indians, excuse me. With the Indians, come postseason time, they're, in my opinion, I could see them winning a World Series. I could see a parade. I could see a celebration. Because they have the guys to win the game. They have the pitching staff. They have the offense to win a postseason series, to win a World Series. Because in my opinion, as long as you have Corey Kluber and Trevor Bauer on your team, you're guaranteed to win at least the division and championship series, maybe a World Series, because that's a completely different stage. It's a step up from that. But when you've got a guy who's pitching almost 9 innings and is striking out 11 guys, you gotta have other guys to pitch, because if he's throwing a complete game, 2 games out of a week, you can't just rely on one guy to pitch that well. You have to have Bauer pitching, possibly a complete game. Just throwing him out there and seeing what he can do after an injury, because he right now is on the disabled list. But when he comes back, they shouldn't just throw him out there. They should see what he can do, let's say in the 5th inning. Even though he is a starter, throw him in the 5th inning. See what he can do, because if you just throw him out there and say you're a starter for this game, he could very easily give up, 4 or 5 runs and only strike out maybe 5 or 6 guys. And in my opinion, that's not good enough when you've got hitters like Mookie Betts, Jose Altuve, Josh Bregman, the list goes on and on. But when you've got hitters like that and teams that are, getting up there as far as, contending for a World Series, the Astros and the Red Sox are the favorites to win. Those 2 teams are 1-2 to win a World Series. They're the Astros, because they're just the defending champs, they're the favorites. But if you look at the Indians' chances, they have a very good chance of winning a World Series. Because, as I said before, you have that pitching staff to win a game and to go deep into the playoffs. But also, you have to bring in, they brought in Andrew Miller last night to close out the game. To see him pitch the way he pitched last night, it was like the old Andrew Miller, that okay 1-2-3 kind of guy, where he can throw pitches and strike out guys in many ways. I mean, granted they were facing the White Sox, so it really wasn't all that big of a test for them. But once you get into that postseason where teams turn it on and they show that ability to, extend innings. Like, it could very easily be, let's say, 3-0 in the 2nd inning. But if you have a guy like Corey Kluber on the hill, you could very easily see maybe a 2-0 Indians lead going into the 3rd inning. You couldn't see a 5-0, let's say, Astros lead heading into the 4th inning. You can't see that when you've got Corey Kluber on the mound, because he's just so good. And when he finds his groove, he just runs and he goes and he shows those different pitches, and it scares guys. I mean, most guys on his curveball will back out of the way because they don't know where it's going to go. But also, when you look at Andrew Miller and Cody Allen and Brad Hand, you may see Brad Hand close out a game once or twice. You may also see Cody Allen come in the 9th inning and close out a game. You may see a guy like Adam Simber come in the 8th inning to slow it down and give Brad Hand or Cody Allen a good chance to win the game. But if the Indians aren't hitting the ball very well, there's a pretty good chance they're not going to win the game unless they can get hits in those clutch situations in the 8th inning, in the 9th inning. But when they're not producing runs in the 1st or 2nd inning, I know it's early in the game, but you got to strike first, because when the Indians strike first, they are unbeatable when they strike first in a game. But when they're playing on the road, you see the Indians struggle very, very often. They will struggle, but they will find those ways to get back in a game and even win a game. But then there's that look of, well, what if, let's say Corey Kluber's, not feeling so well and can't pitch? Do you go to another guy who's already pitched, or do you bring it, or do you, pitch a guy like Bauer for the second straight day? Do you have him pitch another day? Or do you bring in a guy like Dan Otero and have him start? Because the Indians can't just be this team that has this rotation of Kluber, Trevor Bauer, Carlos Carrasco. You can't have those four guys pitch every single game. You can't. Because you have to have other guys come in and produce the strikeouts and to hold teams to no runs, maybe a few maybe one or two hits, but in the postseason, one hit can make a big deal, because that could be the one hit that wins the game for, let's say, the Astros or the Red Sox. But also on the flip side of that, if the Indians are, because they're known to make big comebacks and win games in dramatic fashion, you could have a guy like Francisco Lindor come up and hit a 2-run home run to win a game when, let's say, Carrasco's pitching, but he's pitching so dominantly that even that may be the only hit of the game. But also, when you look at other teams like the Astros, if you have Justin Verlander on the hill for the Astros, he's a very good pitcher, but if the Indians can get to him early in the game, they have a great chance of winning the game and possibly the series, because when a guy like Justin Verlander is, down in the count, or maybe, let's say, down 2-0, there's that switch that's flipped in his mind that is just, he's not doing all that great, and he's not pitching well, and he's not, he has that mindset of, I got to come back, and he tries so hard, but sometimes guys just, they can't get there. So if we were to face the Astros, and we have to face Justin Verlander, to get a few runs on him early would be the best thing for the Indians to do, because he has been known to, struggle in times of situations like that. But also, if we're having to face the Red Sox, we're going to have to face a guy like Chris Sale, who has pitched phenomenally this year. Heck, they got 100+ wins this year. But the postseason, all that is put out of context, because it's like a brand new year, because the postseason, it's your record's clean. It's a clean slate. So teams, when they're cocky like that, like, hey, we got 100 wins, so what? If they don't win a World Series, that doesn't mean anything. So if we were to beat the Red Sox, it'd be like us when we beat the Warriors in 2016 when they had 73 wins. But that really doesn't matter, because it's the postseason. It's a clean slate. So when teams are being like that, where they're saying, oh, we got 100+ wins, who cares? It doesn't matter, because the postseason, it's a whole new thing. It's technically like a whole new year, because it's you got a clean slate, and you're playing at your best. So hopefully the Indians have already clinched the division title, but if they can beat a team like the Astros or like the Red Sox, the National League hasn't looked all that great this year. I think the best team in the National League, I think, is the Braves, but they're a young team, and they've got Ronald Acuna Jr., but that's one guy. So if you look at, the Indians are like the best team in baseball, but they're like second best, because the Red Sox have those 100 wins, or 100+ wins. So the Indians have a great chance this year, because the Cubs are struggling. The Cardinals are struggling. All these good teams that were, great in the first half are just dipping down in the second half, because teams are playing postseason caliber baseball to clinch the division, to get a wild card spot. But it also shows that, you can have one game where you completely, screw up, but that's one game. But in the postseason, one game could make a difference in any situation at all. I mean, it could be game one, but that game could also determine if you win the series or not, because it could be, let's say, a best of 5, and you lose one and win one, and then you lose the second one and win the third one. If teams like the Indians, if they don't lose in that first series, they're on their way to the World Series, in my opinion, because you have that momentum going where you get the hits, you get guys to contribute to the team and to sort of bring in that edge of getting hits, getting run support for the pitchers. But if that isn't coming and the pitching's good, I mean, it just like with Corey Kluber, how a couple games where he pitched very well and we still didn't win because the hits didn't come. The hits weren't coming to us. But also, when he's pitching well and we're hitting well, we're basically guaranteed to win that game because we have good pitching, we have good hitting. But when we have good pitching and our hits aren't producing, odds are we're going to lose the game. But then there's also that, well, what about the clutch situations? Because that also has a huge factor into it. Like having Francisco Lindor come up in the 9th inning and hitting a home run to win a game. There's also that what I would call the it factor, because you could very easily have Lindor get a base hit and start something, and then have Jose Ramirez get a double and have runners second and third with, let's say, one out, or nobody out, excuse me. And then you bring a guy up like Josh Donaldson. He could very easily hit a home run or just get a base hit and win the game right then and there. But if guys are nervous or choking in those situations, you have to go through those situations daily with players, because when a young guy comes up and has to get a base hit in a clutch situation or a key situation in a game, and they're nervous or they have butterflies in their stomach, they're not going to get that hit because they're just so nervous and they just don't know what to do because it's such a big stage. So when you look at that, it all goes to show that even if you have young guys on the team, you've got to bring them to those big situations. You got to have game situations going on in practice. But then there's also that, you have Kluber pitch a game, but if he pitches really well and you're able to have him pitch a complete game, he's incredible when it comes to racking up strikeouts, not giving up many runs. I mean, he only gave up 3 runs and struck out 11 and only had 2 walks. In my opinion, that's a heck of a game for him, because there's that standard to him that if he only allows 3 runs and strikes out 11, that's a great game in his mind. But what the team is looking for is maybe 1 run, maybe 1 earned run, and let's say 13 Ks, or 13 strikeouts, excuse me. That is like the team's norm, but his norm is what he pitched last night. The 3 earned runs, the 11 strikeouts, and the 2 walks. That's his norm. But come postseason time, he's going to be looking at, okay, I've got to get, let's say, 13 strikeouts and maybe 1 earned run and no walks. Because if he gives up those runs early in the game, it's hard for him to come back and throw as dominant as he has been, when you're down 2-0 heading into the 4th inning, or the 3rd inning, excuse me. The pitch, like, Kluber has to pitch very well for the Indians to get a win and to win a World Series. But then you also have to look at Trevor Bauer pitching really well, Carrasco pitching really well, the bullpen coming through, like Brad Hand, Cody Allen, those guys coming through and not choking and not, making a mistake of maybe throwing a pitch low and away to a guy and having him hit it for, let's say, a double. Because if you want to get wins, you have to play top-tier baseball. You have to play postseason caliber baseball. And you also have to play like you're a World Series contender. Because in my opinion, the Indians are a World Series contender. And they've proven it over and over again. Because they're the best team in the American League. Now, granted, they're second to the Red Sox, but that's a great thing, because if you're a team that says, okay, we're up there with the Red Sox, that's a heck of a way to end the year. Like, okay, we were with the best team in the American League. We could hang with them. But once the postseason starts, if you can't hang with a team like the Red Sox, you might as well forget about it and say, you know, we had a great year. You know, winning the division title, great. But if we can beat a team like the Red Sox are going to be flustered if we can either sweep them or get 2 wins out of them, 2 wins off them. Because they've always had that mentality of we're going to win back-to-back games. We're going to, you know, sweep teams. We have that attitude of, you know, who cares? We can win games. But if you put them up against a team like the Indians, it's a very evenly matched game. But the hitting, it's advantage Indians, because you have guys like Francisco Lindor, Jose Ramirez, Edwin Encarnacion, Josh Donaldson, who can make key plays in a game, or even Michael Brantley, who's healthy. If we had him in 2016 and 2017, we could have gotten past the Yankees, and in 2016 we could have won the World Series. But because we didn't have that key piece, we had to bring in a young guy to play left field and to, you know, come up and play in a World Series on a big stage. But when you look at everything happening, the Indians are in a very good spot to get past the Astros or the Red Sox. But it all comes down to, can they stay in games? Can they, you know, keep leads? Because they've been known to have a good lead, like a 4-0 lead heading into like the 6th inning, and to just completely lose that in the 7th inning. But if they can keep leads, I guarantee you there will be a World Series in Cleveland, because there's no team better in baseball. Now, granted, the Red Sox are like the best team in baseball, but there's no team better at closing out games than the Indians, because when you have a pitching staff like we do with Corey Kluber and Trevor Bauer and all those guys, that is one of the best pitching staffs in baseball overall. But when you add a guy like Andrew Miller into the mix, you've got a guy who could be a closer, a reliever. If you put in a guy like Brad Hand or Adam Simber, you have a great opportunity to win games and to close out games and to not give up those key runs in the late innings. But also, it's hard to think that, you know, there's that chance. You know, everybody says, oh, maybe this year. But in the end, you have to look at this in a positive way, because everybody says, oh, maybe next year. But this year is going to be the year, because we've got everybody healthy. You know, we got Josh Donaldson. We got Brad Hand. But all that said, the regular season has been a great regular season, but the postseason, the Indians have to produce, because they can't struggle like they did against the Yankees. They didn't look like the same team that they were in the regular season. They weren't as dominant as they usually are. So if they are to get past the Astros or the Red Sox, they have a very good chance of getting to the World Series and winning the World Series, because the National League, as I said before, the National League hasn't been all that great this year. The Cubs are struggling. The Dodgers are struggling. The best team in the National League is either the Braves or the Nationals. Because the Cubs haven't played. They have great pitching. They just haven't produced those hits that they did in 2016. I mean, they were a great ball club in 2016 when they won the World Series. But they had that attitude of, we can win another one. And there are those teams that will be cocky like that and say, we can win another one. Before the season even starts. And then what happens? They struggle. They choke during games. They don't do well. So if the Indians are to win a World Series this year, they can't have that attitude of, let's win another one. It'd be great to have that mentality, but you can't show it. You can't show that, we have that edge or that cocky attitude of, we can win another one. We can. We can, but if you show it or say it, you're not humble, or you're not saying, hey, we can, let's win another one. You have to have that mentality of, what, if it doesn't happen, so be it. We have won. But there's those teams that's like the norm, like winning back-to-back World Series. I mean, even like look at the Yankees in a couple of years. I mean, a couple of years ago, they were winning World Series left and right. There wasn't a team that could beat them. But then when you bring in a team like the Astros, or the Red Sox, or the Dodgers, it's nice to have that mix of teams instead of just having one team like in the NBA with the Warriors, because in baseball you love to have those, every year championship teams, but after a while it kind of gets a little bit boring, because you're kind of expecting, the Yankees are going to win another World Series, or in the NBA the Warriors are going to win another championship, because then people don't watch. But when you have teams that are under the radar that just come out and surprise you to all end, it's like, okay, now we're going somewhere, because in baseball you don't have those super teams like you do in the NBA, which most people, including me, love, because that way it's not even, but it's like an evenly matched game. Like in the NBA, the Warriors are the best team, but there's other good teams. It's just that the Warriors have been a better team. Some people may call them a super team. I call them just a great team, because they have all-stars. But it's not like they cheat. It's not like they use anything to, score more points. They have a good team. So, all that being said, there's always going to be that best team, that every year team, but there's those other teams that just come under the radar and show that they can win games and, just come up and beat the best of the best. Because there are those teams like the Warriors who will be cocky and who will say, hey, we can, win, 3 or 4 championships in a row. But then you have that sleeper team that comes in and just blows them or let's say the Yankees out of the water. And, there's that quote-unquote Cinderella story being made, because the Yankees were a great team in those years that they won their World Series championships. But over the years, those guys will retire, like Derek Jeter. Once Jeter left the Yankees were nothing, in my opinion. Now that they've got, Giancarlo Stanton and Aaron Judge, they're a great ball club. But before they got those guys, when Derek Jeter left, you didn't see them in the postseason very often. But now that they've got a young guy like Aaron Judge and a veteran like Giancarlo Stanton, you see them in the postseason more often than not, because they have the talent. Just like the Indians have the talent to win a World Series, win 1 or 2 championships. But they have to prove it in not coming up short every time. They have to finish games and not let, the atmosphere or the stage get in their heads. Because overall, the Indians are a championship team. They are. Even though they haven't proven it yet, or they've proven it, but they haven't won a championship yet. They've proven it in winning their division title, their division, for the 3rd straight year. They've proven it in getting to the World Series in 2016. But they haven't gotten over that hump of beating the best of the best and becoming the best of the best. So for this year, the Indians are going to win the World Series, and we will be talking about a parade that will be in the history books. So that'll be just about it. We thank you for listening to The Sports Show here on Lake Effect Radio. We'll see you Monday morning. This is Ryan Kirby signing off.
Hello, good morning, how you doing? Waking up, shaking yesterday's blues, yeah. Turn the TV off, this bad news, man.
Welcome to The Sports Show.
Back up in this